All right, so get this. Today we're going deep on helicopter attitude instrument flying.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, flying when you can't see anything outside.
Right.
It's like, how do you even know where you are?
I know.
And you share these excerpts from the Helicopter Flying Handbook, Chapter 8.
Yeah.
I was reading it, and it blew my mind.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah, so we're going to unpack all that today.
That one's good.
Like how to master this when the horizon just disappears.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like having a sixth sense for where you are in the air.
Yeah. It's funny you should say that
Oh, yeah.
because it's not as different from visual flying as you might think.
Really?
Yeah.
I would have thought it was totally different.
Well, the handbook actually emphasizes that a lot of the control techniques
Okay.
and the thought processes are quite similar.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So whether you're relying on your eyes or on these instruments,
Yeah.
it's not like a whole different way of flying.
Right.
It's more like adapting those skills
Well, right.
to a different set of cues.
Exactly.
That's really fascinating. But what makes instrument flying so challenging then?
Well, the real challenge and the heart of it, I think, is the ability to interpret
Okay.
what those instruments are telling you.
Right.
Because in visual flight, right, you intuitively just process the information
Yeah.
from the horizon, the helicopter, everything around you.
Right.
But with instruments,
Yeah.
you're relying solely on these, dials and gauges and stuff to give you that mental picture of your position and your attitude
I see.
and your movement in the air.
It's like trading that huge panoramic view
Right.
for just this dashboard full of like symbols.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
So how do pilots even begin to make sense of it all?
So the handbook breaks down instrument flying into 3 fundamental skills.
Okay, let's hear it.
So there's instrument cross-check, instrument interpretation, and aircraft control.
Wow. Okay.
These are like the building blocks of safe instrument flight.
Cool. So let's unpack these skills one by one.
All right.
Starting with the instrument cross-check. What exactly does that involve? It sounds kind of like a checklist.
Yeah, it kind of is.
But I'm guessing it's much more dynamic.
Yeah. It's much more dynamic than that. Think of a chef, right?
Right.
Constantly checking different elements while preparing a dish.
Okay.
The cross-check, also known as scanning,
Right.
involves continuously and systematically observing your instruments
I see.
to gather information about the helicopter's attitude and performance.
So it's not just glancing at each instrument.
No,
You're actively piecing together a picture of what the helicopter's doing.
that's exactly right.
That sounds like some serious focus.
Yeah, it does.
And multitasking is required.
It is. It is.
I bet there's some common pitfalls
Oh, for sure.
that pilots might encounter when they're mastering the cross-check.
Yeah,
Like, it seems like it'd be easy to get fixated
right.
on a particular instrument
Yeah,
or miss subtle cues from the others.
totally. You're absolutely right.
So what are some of those pitfalls?
Well, the handbook highlights 3 common errors:
Okay.
fixation, emphasis, and omission.
Okay, so fixation, tell me about that.
Fixation occurs when you just lock on
Oh, well,
to a single instrument,
got it.
like just staring at the turn and slip indicator during a turn,
Okay.
and you neglect the other instruments.
Right.
This can lead to unintended deviations
Okay.
or even a dangerous loss of altitude.
So it's like having tunnel vision in the cockpit.
It really is, yeah.
Okay, so that's fixation. What about emphasis?
Emphasis is a little different.
Okay.
That's when you might be checking all the instruments,
Right.
but you're giving too much weight
Okay.
to one particular reading.
Right.
Perhaps because it seems like the most critical in that moment,
Okay.
but it can distort your overall understanding
Gotcha.
of the situation,
Right.
leading to incorrect control input.
Oh, that's bad. Okay, and then what was the other one? Omission.
Yeah, omission.
What's that?
Omission occurs when you fail to anticipate
Okay.
how other instruments might react
Oh, I see.
following a control input.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, for example,
Yeah.
after leveling off from a climb,
Okay.
you might be so focused on your pitch control
Okay.
that you miss crucial information
Oh, no.
from the heading indicator,
Right.
causing you to drift off course.
So it's like a chain reaction.
It is, yeah.
Every control input you make is going to impact multiple systems.
Right.
And you have to be anticipating
Absolutely.
how those other instruments are going to respond
And not it.
to what you're doing.
That's exactly it.
That's a mental workout.
It is. It is.
So mastering the cross-check involves not just checking the instruments,
Right.
but understanding how they're all interconnected
Yeah,
and how they're going to respond to what you do, to
exactly.
your actions.
Yeah.
But what's the payoff? Like, why is this so important?
Well, the payoff is significant.
Okay.
Once you master the cross-check,
Yeah.
many pilots find they can actually control the helicopter
Okay.
more smoothly
Oh, wow.
and precisely by instruments
Really?
than by visual references alone.
So you're almost more in tune
Right?
with the helicopter when you're using instruments?
Yeah. Once you get it, you get it.
Wow, that's amazing. It's like you're developing a heightened sense of awareness through the instrument?
It really is, yeah.
Okay, cool. So we've explored the cross-check.
Yeah.
Let's move on to instrument interpretation.
All right.
How do pilots decipher the language of these instruments?
It's kind of like a symphony orchestra,
Okay.
where each instrument's contributing a unique melody
Right.
to the overall composition.
Gotcha.
Well, flight instruments work together
Yeah.
to tell a story,
Okay.
the story of your flight.
Okay.
And just as some instruments stand out,
Yeah.
during certain musical passages, the importance of different flight instruments
Right.
shifts
I see.
depending on the maneuver
Right.
or the situation.
Oh, that's a great analogy. So it's like the instruments are taking turns playing the lead role.
Exactly.
But how do you know which instrument is like,
Right.
conducting the orchestra at any given moment?
Well, we call the most important instrument for a particular moment the primary instrument.
Okay.
And then the others that are providing supporting information are called supporting instruments.
Gotcha.
So, for example,
Yeah.
during a pitch or a bank change,
Right.
the attitude indicator
Yeah.
takes center stage
Okay.
because it provides direct information
Right.
about the aircraft's orientation.
Right.
But once you establish that new attitude,
Yeah.
then other instruments, like the altimeter,
Okay.
become primary for maintaining that attitude.
So it's a dynamic dance between all these instruments,
It really is.
with each one stepping into the spotlight when it's needed. And that really highlights how important that continuous cross-check is.
It does, yeah.
Right, because you got to stay aware of all of them,
Yeah.
even the supporting ones,
Right.
so that you can anticipate those shifts
Exactly.
in importance
Yeah.
and maintain that smooth control.
That's exactly right.
All right, so we've covered cross-check, interpretation.
Yep.
Now let's tackle the third skill.
Yeah.
Aircraft control.
Okay.
This is where you translate those readings into
Yeah.
action.
This is it. This is where the rubber meets the road.
You're putting all that knowledge into practice,
Right.
using the controls to guide the helicopter.
Exactly, yeah. It's like reading sheet music
Okay.
and then playing the melody on a musical instrument.
Right.
But your instrument's a flying machine.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So you're conducting this orchestra of instruments
You got it.
through your control inputs.
That's it, yeah.
Okay, so let's break down aircraft control,
All right.
starting with pitch attitude control. What exactly does that mean?
So pitch attitude control is all about managing the helicopter's nose up or nose down movement.
Okay.
It's like a seesaw.
Okay.
You're controlling how high or low the nose goes.
Right.
And the primary instruments for pitch control are the attitude indicator, the altimeter, airspeed indicator, and the VSI.
Okay.
Each offers a unique perspective
Gotcha.
on the pitch attitude.
Right.
And by cross-checking them,
Yeah.
you get a really good understanding of what's going on.
So it's like having multiple witnesses
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
to the same event.
Yeah,
Each one gives you a piece of the puzzle.
that's right.
You got to put it all together.
You got it.
Can you give me an example of how these work together?
Sure, yeah. Let's say you're trying to maintain level flight.
Okay.
You would use the attitude indicator to establish and hold that desired pitch attitude,
Okay.
which might be slightly nose up depending on your airspeed.
Okay.
The altimeter would then tell you if you're gaining or losing altitude,
Right.
which indirectly indicates
Okay.
whether your pitch attitude needs adjusting.
Right.
And the VSI would give you immediate feedback
Okay.
on your vertical speed,
Gotcha.
helping you to fine-tune those adjustments.
So it's a constant balancing act.
It is.
You're interpreting that information.
Right.
And making subtle adjustments to keep the desired
Yeah.
pitch.
You got it, yeah.
It's like walking a tightrope,
Yeah,
but in 3 dimensions.
exactly.
All right. That's cool. Now, is there anything else I need to know about pitch attitude control?
Well, one thing to remember is that there's a slight delay
Okay.
between your control input
Right.
and the instrument response.
I see.
This is normal. It's called control lag.
Control lag,
Okay.
which shouldn't be confused with instrument lag, which is a different phenomenon
Okay, got it.
that we can discuss maybe later.
Okay, control lag. I'm making a note of that.
All right.
So that's pitch attitude control.
What about bank attitude control? Is it similar?
Bank attitude control is about managing the helicopter's tilt,
Okay.
how much it's leaning left or right.
Right.
Think of it like tilting a bowl of soup.
Okay.
You're controlling the angle of the tilt.
Right.
For this, you'll primarily use the attitude indicator, the heading indicator, and the turn indicator.
So just like with pitch, you're using multiple instruments
Yeah,
to build that picture of your bank attitude.
that's right.
And it sounds like the attitude indicator is really important
It is. It is.
because it plays a role in both pitch and bank control.
Right.
So it's the MVP.
That's right. It's the only instrument that gives you instant and direct information
Gotcha.
about pitch and bank.
So it's your primary focus
It is.
whenever you're changing attitude.
That's right.
All right. That's really interesting. So we got pitch and bank.
Yep.
Now let's talk about power control.
Okay.
What's involved with that?
Power control in a helicopter means adjusting the collective pitch and throttle
Right.
to manage the engine's output.
Okay.
It's kind of like controlling the flow of water from a faucet.
Okay.
You're managing how much power
Okay.
the engine's delivering.
Gotcha.
In reciprocating powered helicopters,
Yep.
you monitor this using the manifold pressure gauge,
Okay.
while in turbine-powered helicopters, it's the torque gauge.
Okay. So those gauges are telling you how much power is coming out of the engine.
Exactly.
How does that translate into controlling the helicopter?
So power control is really important for managing your airspeed and climb or descent rate.
Go.
For example, to increase your airspeed in level flight,
Yeah.
you would add power.
Okay.
Conversely, to descend, you would reduce power.
Gotcha.
So it's another balancing act.
Right.
You're coordinating power, pitch, and airspeed
Right.
to achieve that flight path that you want.
Wow. So it's like juggling.
It really is, yeah.
You got to keep all these things in the air at the same time.
Right.
Pitch, bank, power.
What about trim?
Trim.
Yeah.
Yes. I feel like that's an often overlooked
Yeah.
but crucial part.
It is. It's
Flying.
very important, yeah.
What's trim all about?
So trim refers to adjustments that relieve pressure on the cyclic control
Okay.
and center the ball on the turn indicator.
Right.
Think of it like fine-tuning
Okay.
the tension on a set of reins.
Okay.
So it helps you maintain a steady course
Right.
without constantly fighting the controls.
So you're finding that sweet spot where the helicopter wants to fly.
Exactly.
Straight and level with minimal input.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
So we've covered those basic concepts
Yep.
of instrument flying.
Right.
But let's put these skills to the test.
Okay.
Where do we even begin with applying these concepts?
I think the best place to start is with the foundation of all flight,
Okay.
straight and level flight.
Right. Straight and level.
It's the building block for everything else.
Even the name sounds simple.
It does.
But I bet there's a lot more to it
Oh, for sure.
than meets the eye, especially under instrument conditions.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. So straight and level flight. Coming up next.
Let's do it. Yeah, you're right. It's not as simple as it sounds. Under instrument conditions, you got to precisely control the altitude, heading, airspeed, and the pedal trim. It's like, when you try to balance on a beach ball, you need to be making those constant little adjustments just to stay centered.
Okay. I can already feel my brain working overtime just picturing that.
Right.
So let's break it down like step by step.
Uh-huh.
How do you maintain your altitude when you can't even look outside and see the horizon?
Well, remember how we talked about pitch attitude?
Uh-huh.
It's the angle between the helicopter's nose and that horizon.
Right.
In straight and level flight, that pitch attitude might vary a little bit depending on your airspeed,
Right.
but it's going to be generally pretty close to level.
Okay. So how do you actually use the instruments to maintain that level attitude when you can't see the horizon?
Yeah.
It sounds like a bit of a paradox.
Yeah, it is a little bit, but that's where our trusty attitude indicator comes in.
Okay.
It becomes like your main reference point for
Right.
keeping that desired pitch attitude. But it's not working alone.
Oh, okay.
The altimeter is also crucial.
Okay, so the altimeter is like your backup, making sure you're not drifting up or down, even if that pitch attitude looks good.
Exactly. It's that reality check.
Gotcha.
If you see that you're losing altitude, it means that your pitch attitude is too low.
Right.
And vice versa.
Okay.
And then the rate that the needle's moving on the altimeter
Yeah.
gives you a sense of urgency.
Oh, interesting.
So like a rapid change means you've got a bigger deviation in pitch
Oh, okay.
that needs a faster correction.
So it's not just looking at what the altimeter says.
Right.
It's how fast it's changing.
Exactly
That
right.
tells you how urgent the situation is.
What about the VSI? Where does that fit in?
So the VSI, the vertical speed indicator,
Right.
it's like the speedometer for your up and down movement.
Okay. It tells you whether you're climbing, descending, or staying level.
Got it.
It's much more immediate than the altimeter.
Okay.
And it's like an early warning
Right.
for those pitch attitude deviations before you see them on the altimeter.
Oh, that's pretty handy. So the VSI is all about catching those little changes before they become something bigger.
Right.
But we're talking about maintaining a constant airspeed as well, right?
We are, yeah.
So doesn't the airspeed indicator also play a role in that pitch control?
That is a great point. While the airspeed indicator's main job is obviously indicating your airspeed,
Right.
changes in airspeed can also signal that you need to adjust the pitch.
Okay, how so?
So if your airspeed's increasing at a constant power setting, it kind of suggests that your nose is dropping
Okay,
and you need to increase the pitch attitude.
right.
And the opposite is true as well. If the airspeed decreases, you'd lower the pitch attitude.
Wow, so you're constantly putting together all this information from these instruments.
You are, yeah.
The attitude indicator, the altimeter, the VSI, the airspeed indicator, just to stay straight and level.
Right.
That is a lot to juggle.
It is. It is. And you got to remember those common pitfalls we talked about.
Yeah.
The fixation, the emphasis, and the omission.
Right.
They all apply here. You need to avoid getting stuck on one instrument
Right.
and maintain that balanced perspective.
Right.
And really anticipate how the readings might change
Right.
after you make a control input.
Okay. So we've tackled how to maintain your altitude during straight and level flight.
Right.
Now, what about heading? Like, how do you make sure you're not just veering off course when you can't even see any landmarks?
So that's where bank control comes in. Remember, bank control is about keeping those wings level. In visual flight, it's super easy. You just look at the horizon.
Right.
But with instruments,
Yeah.
our trusty friends come to the rescue again.
I bet the attitude indicator's the star of the show again, right?
You got it.
Okay.
It's our primary reference for bank control as well. But again, not working alone.
Right.
We've also got the heading indicator and the turn indicator.
Okay.
They give us the full picture.
Got it.
The heading indicator tells us if we're staying on that desired heading
Oh.
or if we're drifting off.
Right.
And the turn indicator tells us whether we're turning
Right.
and how fast.
Okay, so it's like having a compass, a GPS, and a gyroscope all in one,
That's a great way to think about it, yeah.
working together to keep you going where you need to go.
Exactly.
But how do you actually use these instruments to keep a steady heading?
Well, let's say you want to hold a heading of 360.
Okay.
You'd make sure, looking at the attitude indicator, that your wings are level.
Okay.
So that little airplane symbol on the instrument
Yep.
should be right in line with the horizon line.
Right.
And if you start seeing the heading indicator drift away from 360,
Yeah.
that means you're starting to bank.
Oh, I see.
And you need to correct that with the cyclic.
Got it. So the heading indicator is kind of your course correction tool.
Right, exactly.
But what about the turn indicator? What's that for?
So the turn indicator, it's really good for detecting those subtle banks
Okay.
that you might miss on the attitude indicator.
Oh, okay.
Even the smallest movement of that needle away from the center
Yeah.
tells you you're banking.
Right.
So you can make a small correction
Right.
before you really drift off course.
So it's like an early warning system
Yeah, exactly.
for those little unintentional turns.
Right, right.
It's so cool how all these instruments have their own little personality and role in this whole straight and level flight thing.
Yeah, they do.
Okay, we've got pitch, bank, and now what about power? How do you keep that airspeed constant?
So in straight and level flight, your power is basically what dictates your airspeed.
Okay.
So remember those power gauges?
Yeah.
The manifold pressure gauge and the torque gauge.
Yep.
Those are your guides
Right?
for maintaining a steady airspeed.
Okay, so it's like finding that sweet spot on the gas pedal
Exactly.
where you can maintain your speed
That's a good analogy.
without accelerating or decelerating.
Right. But helicopters, they're very dynamic.
Right.
You'll have to adjust the power to compensate for things like air density,
Oh,
wind conditions, things like that.
even in straight and level flight.
Even in straight and level flight.
It's not just set it and forget it.
Right.
You got to be thinking ahead. Huh?
You do.
So how do you know if you've got the right setting for a certain airspeed?
Well, that's where the helicopter's performance charts come in.
Okay.
They're like your recipe book for helicopter performance.
Okay.
They give you all the info about the power settings
Okay.
that you need to get specific airspeeds at different altitudes and weights.
So you're thinking about the altitude, the weight of the helicopter, even the weather
All of that.
to find that perfect setting.
Exactly, yeah.
It's like a science experiment up there.
It really is, but even with the charts, Experience really helps
Right.
because you get a feel for how your helicopter performs under different conditions.
Oh,
You'll learn to kind of anticipate those power adjustments.
you become one with the machine.
Yeah, you do. You do.
You just understand how it works
Right.
and how to respond to it. This is fascinating.
It is, yeah.
Okay, so we've covered pitch, bank, and power
Mm.
in straight and level flight. Is there anything else we need to think about?
We can't forget pedal trim.
Oh, yeah. Pedal trim. It seems like that gets overlooked a lot,
It does, yeah.
but it's still so important,
Very important.
even when we're just flying straight and level.
Right.
Why is that?
Well, remember we talked about coordinated flight,
Uh-huh.
where all the forces are kind of balanced?
Right.
Pedal trim is what helps us keep that balance.
Okay.
It makes sure that you're not slipping or skidding through the air,
Right.
which could be inefficient and even dangerous.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you know if you need to adjust the pedal trim?
Well, you keep an eye on that little ball in the turn indicator,
Okay.
sometimes called the turn coordinator.
Right.
If that ball's in the middle, you're good.
Gotcha.
Coordinated flight.
Okay.
But if it starts to drift, you'll need to adjust the trim to bring it back.
Well, that makes sense. It's like a little tiny level
Yeah.
built into your instrument panel.
Right.
That's telling you if you're coordinated or not.
Yeah.
It's incredible how much goes into just staying straight and level under instrument conditions.
It is.
You're always watching these instruments
Right.
and making all these little adjustments
Yep.
just to stay on course.
Exactly.
All right, so I think we've got the art of straight and level flight down,
Okay.
at least in theory.
Good.
So now let's take things up a notch.
All right.
Let's talk about climbs and descents.
Okay.
How do you manage those changes in altitude when you're flying on instruments?
So climbs and descents, just like everything else in instrument flying,
Yeah.
requires a coordinated approach.
Okay.
It's all about working those controls,
Okay.
the cyclic collective and the pedals,
Right.
in harmony with what the instruments are telling you.
So it's like this three-way dance between your hands, your feet, and the instruments.
That's a great way to put it.
Instead of watching, the horizon and the ground,
Yeah,
you're relying on those needles and dials
you got it.
to tell you where you are.
Right.
So let's start with climbs.
Right.
What are the different types of climbs we might do?
Well, there's two main types,
Okay.
constant airspeed climbs and constant rate climbs.
Okay.
Constant airspeed climb, you're keeping the airspeed steady
Right.
throughout the climb.
Okay.
And constant rate, you're holding a specific rate of climb,
Gotcha.
measured in feet per minute.
So constant airspeed is about maintaining your forward swing.
Right.
And constant rate is how fast you're going up. Got it. So how do you start a constant airspeed climb when you're flying on instrument? It seems like there's a lot to do at once.
There is, yeah. It's all about coordinating those control inputs.
Okay.
First, you figure out what airspeed you want to climb at,
Okay.
which is usually slower than your cruising speed.
Right.
Then you increase the power and adjust the pitch attitude at the same time
Okay.
using that attitude indicator.
So like stepping on the gas and pulling back on the stick,
That's a good analogy.
but more gentle.
More gentle, more coordinated.
Yeah. Okay. And what are you looking at on the instruments during this climb?
Well, your focus is going to be shifting a bit
Okay.
as you go from level flight into the climb.
Right.
At first, you're going to be watching that airspeed indicator like a hawk to make sure you hit that target airspeed.
Okay.
But as the helicopter starts climbing and stabilizes,
Yeah.
your focus is going to shift over to the VSI.
Gotcha.
Now you're making sure you keep a steady rate of climb.
Oh, okay. So it's like passing the baton
It is.
back and forth between those two instruments.
Exactly.
But you're still keeping an eye on the power gauges
You are.
and the heading indicator to make sure you're not going the wrong way or overworking the engine.
You got it. It's a balancing act.
It really is.
Okay.
So that's constant airspeed climbs.
Yeah.
Let's talk about constant rate climbs now.
All right.
You said those are about controlling how fast you're going up.
Right.
How are they different from constant airspeed climbs?
The main difference is where you're focusing.
Okay.
In a constant rate climb, you're trying to keep a specific rate of climb,
Right.
usually 500 or 1,000 feet per minute.
Okay.
You'll still adjust power and pitch,
Right.
but your main instrument's going to be that VSI.
Okay.
You're using that to adjust the pitch attitude
Okay.
and hold that desired rate.
So in a constant airspeed climb, you're watching the airspeed indicator the most.
Right.
And a constant rate climb is the VSI.
Right.
It all depends on what's most important for that maneuver.
Exactly.
Does the airspeed indicator become irrelevant in a constant rate climb?
Not at all.
Okay.
It just takes on a different role.
What does it do?
So in a constant rate climb, the airspeed indicator becomes your main instrument for power control.
Oh, yeah.
You adjust the power to maintain your airspeed
Right.
while using the VSI to hold that climb rate.
So it's like a perfectly coordinated
It
dance
is.
with all those instruments
Right.
and the controls
Yep.
to get to a specific goal.
Right. That's a great way to think about it.
This is wild.
It is.
Okay, so we've covered climb entries.
Yep.
How do you go from a climb back to level flight smoothly?
So leveling off, it needs anticipation.
Okay.
Smooth control inputs.
Okay.
You can't just yank back on the controls when you reach the altitude you want.
Right. That'd be rough.
Yeah, it'd be like slamming on the brakes.
Yeah, exactly.
Not a good idea.
Okay, so smooth and gradual is what we're going for.
Smooth and gradual.
But how do you know when to start leveling off?
We use what's called a lead point.
Okay,
It's the altitude where you begin to level off.
gotcha.
A good rule is to use 10% of your vertical speed as your lead point.
Okay.
So if you're climbing at 500 feet per minute,
Yeah.
you'd start leveling off about 50 feet before your target altitude.
Okay, so it's like anticipating a stop sign
It is.
and letting off the gas a little bit before you come to a complete stop.
That's a great analogy.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And during the level off, what instruments are you mainly watching?
As you get to that lead point,
Yeah.
the altimeter is going to be your primary instrument again for pitch control.
Okay.
You gently adjust that pitch attitude toward level flight,
Okay.
and you're cross-checking with the altimeter and the VSI
Gotcha.
to make sure you're approaching that altitude smoothly
Oh, wait.
and that vertical speed is going down.
Right. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. So we've covered climbs and level offs. What about descents? Is it just the opposite of a climb?
Pretty much, yeah. You're basically doing the reverse of what you did for a climb.
Okay.
But there are some little things to think about.
Okay. I'm all ears. Walk me through a descent under instrument conditions. Like, what are the main steps?
So just like with climbs, there's two main types of descents.
Okay.
Constant airspeed descents and constant rate descents.
Right.
In a constant airspeed descent, you're trying to keep a specific airspeed the whole way down.
Okay.
You do this by reducing power to what we call a descent power setting
Okay.
and holding your altitude until your airspeed gets close to the value you want.
So you're letting the helicopter come down naturally,
Right.
but managing your speed.
Exactly.
So it's like gliding in an airplane.
It is kind of like that, yeah.
And your instrument focus shifts again.
Actually, yes, yeah.
During that entry.
At first, you're watching the airspeed indicator to get that target airspeed.
Right.
But as you get into a steady descent, the VSI is going to become your main instrument for pitch control.
Okay.
Now you're using it to manage your rate of descent.
So the VSI is back in the spotlight,
It is.
helping you control how fast you're going down.
Yeah.
It's so cool how these instruments can just like switch roles depending on what you're doing.
It is pretty cool.
Yeah. What about constant rate descents? How do they work?
So in a constant rate descent,
Yeah.
you're trying to maintain a specific rate of descent,
Okay.
typically 500 or 1,000 feet per minute.
Gotcha.
You start by reducing the power to about the setting you need for that descent rate.
Okay.
And just like those constant rate climbs,
Uh-huh.
the VSI is going to be your main instrument for pitch control.
Got it.
You're using it to adjust the pitch and hold that rate of descent.
So same as the climb, just going the other way.
Exactly.
You're using the VSI to control how fast you're going down. What about the airspeed indicator in this case?
So now the airspeed indicator becomes your main tool for power control. You'll adjust the power to keep your airspeed where you want it,
Right.
while using the VSI to keep that descent rate steady.
It's like a mirror image of the constant rate climb.
It really is, yeah.
Same instrument, same concept, just in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
What about leveling off from a descent?
For leveling off, you'll still use a lead point,
Okay.
usually 10% of your descent rate.
Right.
So if you're going down at 500 feet per minute,
Uh-huh.
you'd start leveling off about 50 feet above your target altitude.
So if I'm coming down at 500 feet per minute,
Yep.
I start leveling off about 50 feet before my target altitude.
That's right.
Okay, got it.
As you reach that lead point,
Yeah.
your focus shifts to the altimeter.
Okay.
You gently increase the pitch to level off,
Right.
and you're still cross-checking the altimeter and VSI
Right.
to make sure it's smooth,
Yeah.
and you're slowing that descent rate.
Right. So we're basically using that same concept from climbs and level offs.
Yeah.
But in reverse.
Yes, exactly.
It's all about anticipating the maneuver and being nice and smooth to avoid those sudden changes.
That's exactly right.
I'm really starting to see that anticipating and smoothness are key in instrument flying.
They really are.
It
Yeah.
applies to everything, not just climbs and descents.
Yeah. Speaking of other maneuvers,
Yeah.
we've talked about climbs, descents,
Yeah.
level offs,
Right.
all straight ahead flying.
Right.
What's next?
Well, it's time to tackle turns.
Okay.
But turns under instrument conditions.
Yeah.
I bet that's a whole other story, right?
It is. It is.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's hear it.
All right. So turns under instrument conditions.
Yeah.
They need a different way of thinking about them
Okay.
compared to visual flight.
Okay.
It's all about precision
Okay.
and coordination.
Got it.
The key is maintaining a specific rate of turn,
Okay.
which is usually measured in degrees per second,
Okay.
and then rolling out of the turn precisely on your desired heading. For this, we use a combination of controls and instruments,
Okay.
mainly the attitude indicator, the heading indicator, and that trusty turn indicator.
Sounds like a lot to keep track of.
It can be. So let's break it down.
Okay.
Starting with a classic, the standard rate turn.
All right. What is a standard rate turn?
So it's a turn at a rate of 3 degrees per second.
Huh.
To start one, you smoothly apply some pressure to the cyclic
Right.
in the direction you want to turn.
Got it.
As you're rolling into the turn,
Yeah.
you're mainly focused on the attitude indicator.
Okay.
You're going to use that to get the bank angle you need for that standard rate.
Okay, so you're rolling in, watching the attitude indicator.
Yeah,
How do you know what bank angle you need?
there's a good rule of thumb for that.
Okay.
You use 15% of your airspeed.
All right.
So if you're flying at 80 knots,
Yep.
you want a bank angle of about 12 degrees
Oh, okay.
for that standard rate turn.
So there's like a little formula for it.
Yeah.
That's cool. So you roll into the turn, watching the attitude indicator to get that bank angle.
Right.
Then what?
So once the turn indicator shows you're doing a standard rate turn,
Yeah.
which you'll see by the needle lining up with the standard rate mark,
Okay.
your focus is going to shift to that instrument.
Yeah, wait.
Now you're trying to keep that needle right on the mark
Got it.
to hold that constant rate of turn.
So again, it's like passing the baton
It is.
between the attitude indicator and the turn indicator.
That's exactly right.
Each one is important at the right time.
Yeah.
So while you're focused on that turn, what about the other instruments?
You can't forget about them.
Right.
The altimeter is still how you're controlling your altitude.
Okay.
And the airspeed indicator is for power control,
Okay.
making sure you keep that airspeed steady.
So even in a turn, you're still juggling all those instruments
Yeah, that's a lot.
and all those controls.
Right.
That's a serious mental workout.
It is.
Plus, you got to use your hands and feet.
It's a lot going on. And remember that pedal trim,
Oh, right.
you'll be adjusting that to keep the ball in the turn coordinator centered
Okay.
for coordinated flight.
All right. So we're turning, we're holding our altitude, we're holding our airspeed, we're coordinated.
Yep.
How do we stop the turn smoothly and end up on a heading we want?
Just like with level offs, rolling out of a turn needs some anticipation
Okay.
and smooth control inputs.
Okay.
You can't just suddenly level the wings
Right.
when you reach the heading.
Right. That'd be like a pothole.
It would.
Okay, so smooth is the name of the game.
Smooth is the game.
How do you anticipate that rollout to make it a smooth transition?
We use a lead point for turns too.
Okay.
It's usually half your bank angle.
Gotcha.
So if you're in a 12-degree bank,
Yeah.
you'd start rolling out about 6 degrees before reaching your heading.
Okay.
It's about knowing when to start that opposite movement.
Right.
To smoothly unwind from the turn.
So what instruments are you using during this?
So as you hit that laid point,
Yeah.
you're going back to the attitude indicator as your main focus.
Okay.
You're going to use the cyclic to bring the wings back to level.
Right.
And as you get close to the heading you want,
Yeah.
the heading indicator takes over
Okay.
to make sure you roll out precisely on course.
So again, it's passing the baton back and forth between those instruments.
It is, yeah.
It's incredible how it all works together.
It is.
Okay, so that was the standard rate turn.
Right.
Are there other types of turns we might do under instrument conditions?
Yeah, sometimes you might need to do a turn to a predetermined heading
Okay.
or a timed turn,
Okay.
especially if your heading indicator is acting up.
Right. Okay, let's talk about turns to a predetermined heading.
Okay.
How are those different from standard rate turns?
The main difference is what you're trying to do.
Okay.
In a standard rate turn, you want to maintain that specific rate. But in a turn to a predetermined heading, you want to roll out on a specific heading.
Gotcha.
So less about how fast you're turning, more about hitting that specific heading.
Exactly.
So the technique's similar
Yeah.
to a standard rate turn,
Okay.
but that lead point calculation becomes even more important.
Oh, okay. Expertise.
You're right, you got to account for the helicopter's inertia,
Right.
which could make you overshoot that heading if you're not careful.
So it's like you have to compensate for the momentum,
Right.
like a pendulum swinging.
Exactly, yeah.
You got to anticipate that swing
Right.
and start your counter movement early.
You got it.
Okay. And then once you've got that lead point figured out, You use the attitude indicator to start rolling out.
Yep.
And then as you get close to your heading, you switch to the heading indicator.
Exactly.
Okay.
Smooth, coordinated movements
Okay.
and precise instrument interpretation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What about those time turns? When would you use those?
So you mentioned they're good when the heading indicator isn't working right,
Right.
but they're also really useful
Yeah.
when you have to make a specific heading change in a certain amount of time.
Oh,
Like imagine you're coming in for a landing.
yeah.
At an airport, it's low visibility.
Right.
And ATC tells you to make a 90-degree turn in 30 seconds to line up with the runway.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's when you'd use a timed turn.
So it's like this real-time puzzle.
It is.
You got to figure out how fast to turn to make that heading change in time.
Right.
But how do you actually do a timed turn?
You're still going to use your instruments,
Okay.
mainly the turn indicator and a clock,
Oh, okay.
to time that turn accurately.
So the clock is kind of replacing the heading indicator.
Exactly.
That's really cool. And you're still cross-checking all those other instruments,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The altimeter for your altitude,
Yep.
the airspeed indicator for your speed,
Right.
and the turn coordinator to stay coordinated.
All of it.
Okay, so we've covered standard rate turns,
Yeah.
turns to a predetermined heading,
Mm-hmm.
timed turns.
Right.
But turns can get even more complex, right?
They can. They can.
Sometimes you might need to change your airspeed during a turn,
Right.
or climb or descend,
Yeah.
or even do a steeper turn, though that's probably not as common
Not as common, no.
in real-world instrument conditions.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack those one by one.
Okay.
Starting with changing airspeed during a turn. How do you manage that?
So changing your airspeed in a turn,
Yeah.
it's all about this delicate dance
Okay.
between your power, pitch, and bank control.
Okay.
Remember how we said the bank angle you need for a standard rate turn changes with your airspeed?
Yeah.
Well, as you change the airspeed, you're also going to have to adjust that bank angle
Right.
to keep that constant rate of turn.
So now we're managing airspeed, bank angle, and altitude all at the same time.
We are.
That is a lot.
It is.
Yeah. What instruments are you focusing on the most during that maneuver?
Your focus is going to shift again,
Okay.
depending on if you're speeding up or slowing down.
Right.
If you're slowing down,
Yeah.
you're mainly watching that manifold pressure gauge or the torque gauge
Right.
as you're adjusting the power.
Okay.
But as you get close to the new airspeed you want,
Yeah.
the airspeed indicator takes over again.
Right. So
Okay.
it's all about knowing which instrument is giving you the most important information at that time.
That's exactly it.
What about keeping your altitude while you're changing airspeed in a turn?
The altimeter is still your go-to for pitch control.
Okay.
You adjust the pitch as needed to hold that altitude,
Right.
even as your airspeed and bank angle are changing.
Man, this is intense.
It is.
I can see why this takes so much practice.
Yeah,
And mental juggling.
for sure.
Yeah.
But it's rewarding.
Yeah.
It's about pushing yourself and proving you can handle it.
Right. Now, what about climbing and descending turns?
So climbing and descending turns,
Yeah.
you're basically combining those techniques
Okay.
that we've already talked about for
Yeah.
climbs, descents, and turns.
Right.
It's about multitasking,
Okay.
managing your pitch, bank, power, trim
Right.
to turn and climb or descend at the same time.
So you're just adding another layer to that whole instrument flying dance.
That's a good way to think about it.
And your instrument focus changes again.
No, it does. So in a climbing turn,
Okay.
once you've got your climb rate set,
Okay.
the VSI is going to be your main guide for pitch control.
Okay.
And the turn indicator is still the star for bank control.
Right.
In a descending turn, same thing.
Yeah.
VSI is your main focus for pitch
Okay.
and the turn indicator for bank.
Got it. So you're making all these adjustments to keep your climb or descent rate steady
Right.
and keep the turn going at the same time.
You got it.
That is a lot to keep track of.
It is. But we're always cross-checking those other instruments.
Right.
The power gauges, the altimeter, the heading indicator,
Okay.
making sure we're not drifting or overworking the helicopter.
So it's all about balance.
It is.
Okay, so we've covered standard rate turns, turns to predetermined headings, timed turns, even climbing and descending while turning.
Yep.
But you mentioned something about steeper bank turns too.
Right.
What are those all about?
So those steeper bank turns, usually 30-degree bank turns,
Okay,
they're not as common in real-world instrument flying. They're more of a training thing
gotcha.
to help pilots develop really smooth control inputs
Okay,
and that quick instrument interpretation you need for tougher situations.
so like taking your skills to the gym
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
and pushing your limits.
That's exactly it.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
But if we did find ourselves in one of those steeper turns under instrument conditions, what would be the most important things to consider?
So the big challenge with those steeper bank angles is the vertical lift really drops off, which can make you lose altitude and airspeed really quickly
Oh, okay.
if you're not careful.
So you really got to be on top of your pitch and power control in those
You
situations.
really do. You got to be watching those instruments, the
Yeah.
altimeter, the VSI, and the airspeed indicator.
Okay.
Making sure you're making those smooth adjustments
Right.
to stay ahead of the helicopter.
I can see why practicing those steeper turns would be good for your instrument flying reflexes.
Yeah.
It's like expanding your comfort zone
Right.
and getting ready for the unexpected.
That's exactly right.
Okay, cool. So now let's shift gears a bit and talk about emergencies,
Okay.
because that's something every pilot needs to be prepared for,
Absolutely.
whether they're flying visually or using instruments.
Right.
How is handling an emergency different when you're flying on instruments?
So the basics of handling emergencies are the same.
Okay.
Whether you're flying visually or using instruments,
Right.
it's always about aviate, navigate, communicate.
Right.
But instrument conditions definitely make things harder.
Yeah,
It's already stressful, right? And then you're in this more demanding environment.
right, exactly.
So being prepared is so important.
Huh.
Having a good plan before you take off,
Right.
knowing your helicopter really well,
Right.
and having all your emergency stuff ready to go.
Okay, so let's break those down one by one.
All right.
Starting with that pre-flight planning.
Mm-hmm.
What are the key things to think about when you're getting ready for an instrument flight? Like, do you need to be even more careful than usual?
You do. You do. When you're planning an instrument flight,
Yeah.
you really got to think through those what-if scenarios
Okay.
more carefully.
Okay.
So you got to pick your route carefully,
Okay.
identify those alternate airports or landing spots,
Right.
and make sure you've got enough fuel to get to your destination
Right.
to an alternate, plus any extra fuel you might need.
So it's all about having backup plans in case things go wrong. And you have to be really thorough with your pre-flight inspection too, right?
You do. That means checking everything.
Okay.
The helicopter structure, the controls, the engine,
Right.
the instruments, the navigation equipment.
Okay.
You want to be 100% sure that everything's working
Yeah.
before you go up into those conditions.
That makes sense. What about those emergency resources?
So having those resources easy to get to
Okay.
really make a difference.
Joe.
Things like your charts, publications, flashlights, survival gear,
Okay.
a fire extinguisher,
Right.
and knowing how to use all of that stuff.
Yeah, it's not just about having the stuff, it's knowing how to use it.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about what to do if an emergency actually happens.
Okay.
You're cruising along, instruments are your only guide,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden the engine quits.
Oh.
What are your immediate actions?
Well, remember? Aviate, navigate, communicate. First thing is to control the helicopter.
Right.
And if the engine's out, that means getting into a safe auto rotation.
Auto rotation.
Right.
Every helicopter pilot trains for this.
Right.
But it sounds so much scarier when you can't see the ground.
It is.
What goes through your mind when you have to do that on instruments?
Well, it's definitely high stress.
Yeah.
But the basics are still the same.
Okay.
You reduce the collective to keep the rotor spinning.
Right.
You use the pedals to keep it coordinated.
Right.
And then you adjust your pitch to get the right airspeed for auto rotation.
So it's those same basic skills again.
It is.
Pitch, bank, airspeed.
Right.
But it's much more intense now.
Much more intense.
So what instruments are you really glued to during an auto rotation?
The airspeed indicator becomes your main focus for pitch control.
Okay.
You're trying to hold that best airspeed for auto rotation.
Right.
And then the heading indicator is super important for bank control.
Okay.
You want to keep a controlled descent
Right.
and not go off course.
Right. So you're using those instruments to control the descent.
Right.
And make those important adjustments to keep things under control.
Exactly.
So you've got the helicopter under control now.
Yep.
What's next?
So now it's about navigation.
Right.
You got to find a place to land
Right.
and get there safely.
And this is where those alternate airports and landing spots that we talked about come into play, right?
It's right.
Having those already marked on your charts can really help, especially when you're stressed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But there's one more crucial step,
Yeah.
right? Communication.
Right.
You got to let someone know what's going on. What do you do?
As soon as it's safe,
Yeah.
you've got to tell ATC you've got an emergency.
Right.
You'll use the last frequency they gave you,
Okay.
or the emergency frequency, 121.5,
Right.
and you set your transponder to 7700.
Right.
That's the emergency code.
So it's like a signal flare, but digital.
It is.
Telling everyone that you need help.
Exactly.
What can ATC actually do for you in that situation?
They can be a huge help.
Okay.
They can give you directions to a good landing spot,
Okay.
update you on the weather,
Right.
and even tell other aircraft to get out of your way.
Yeah.
They're really your partners
Right.
in getting you back on the ground safely.
Okay, so even in an emergency, that communication is key.
Absolutely.
ATC can really be there for you when you need them most.
They can.
Now, engine failure is just one example of an emergency.
Right.
What are some other things that we should be ready for when we're flying on instruments?
So low fuel, electrical failures, instrument problems are just a few.
Right.
Each one needs a different response.
Okay.
So knowing your emergency procedures really well is crucial.
Yeah, it sounds like spending some time with that checklist is a good idea.
It is.
But even with all that knowledge, all that prep, it's still got to be super stressful to handle an emergency when you're relying on instruments.
Yeah, it can be. But the key is to stay calm. Focus on those core things.
Right.
Aviate, navigate, communicate.
Right.
And trust your training.
Okay.
And always, always remember to fly the helicopter first.
Right, because if you lose control of the helicopter, nothing else matters.
Exactly.
Okay, that's really good advice.
Yeah.
But going back to those unique challenges,
Yeah.
you mentioned autorotations with servo failure.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty intense. What are servos, and why are they so important for helicopter flight?
Servos are basically little helpers
Okay.
that move the helicopter's control surfaces.
Okay.
Lots of modern helicopters
Yeah.
that are set up for instrument flying have autopilots.
Right.
And those autopilots use servos to work.
So the servos are like the muscles of the autopilot.
That's a good way to think about it.
They actually move the controls. What happens if one fails during an auto rotation?
So a servo failure during an auto rotation makes the pilot's job a lot harder.
Okay.
The helicopter's more difficult to control.
Right.
And you might have to change how you're doing the auto rotation.
But to make up for that lost help. It's like trying to steer a car without power steering.
Oh,
You can still do it,
Right.
but it takes more work.
It does. Okay. I can see how that would be tricky, especially when you're already dealing with an engine failure.
Right.
Does the type of servo failure make a difference?
Absolutely. What you do depends on which servo fails
Okay.
and how bad the failure is.
Right.
Like if a cyclic servo fails,
Yeah.
you might have to land right away
Okay.
because controlling the pitch and roll gets way harder.
Right.
But if it's an anti-torque or a collective servo,
Okay.
you might be able to keep going to a good landing spot,
Okay.
but you'll have to adjust how you're flying.
Right. Okay. So that's servo failures during auto rotations.
Right.
What other unique things might we run into when we're flying helicopters on instruments?
Instrument takeoffs can be tough.
Instrument takeoff. Wait, don't you need to see to take off safely?
You do, ideally,
Right.
but sometimes you might need to take off using instruments.
Okay.
Like if it's so foggy you can barely see,
Right.
you might have enough visibility to lift off,
Okay.
but not enough to keep flying visually.
I see.
Or maybe you lose visibility after you're already in the air
Okay, yeah.
because of fog or clouds.
Right.
Being able to take off on instruments in those situations could save the day.
It could. Okay, so what are the key things to remember for instrument takeoffs in a helicopter?
It's all about being precise,
Okay.
being smooth,
Okay.
and really knowing your helicopter's systems and procedures.
Right.
You'll want to be extra careful with your checks before takeoff.
Okay.
Make sure all the instruments are working.
Right.
And that you know the takeoff steps in your flight manual.
So it's all about preparation.
It is.
And paying attention to the details.
Yeah.
Okay, so talk me through a typical instrument takeoff. What are the steps?
So after you do those pre-takeoff checks,
Yeah.
you line up with the runway,
Okay.
put on the brakes.
And adjust the friction on the collective
Okay.
so it doesn't move on its own.
Okay.
It's about making a stable platform to lift off from.
Gotcha.
So then you gently add collective and power,
Right.
watching your instruments like a hawk.
Okay.
At first, you'll mostly use the pedals to control your heading
Okay.
because you don't have visual cues.
Right.
It's all about trusting those instruments and those small control inputs.
It sounds like it takes a lot of finesse.
It does. It does. As the helicopter lifts off and speeds up,
Yeah.
you'll transition to coordinated flight,
Okay.
using the cyclic for pitch and roll
Right.
and the pedals to hold your heading.
Okay.
And your instrument focus is going to shift throughout the takeoff.
Again, it's all about those transitions.
It is, yeah.
Anticipating them and being smooth.
Exactly.
At first, it's the attitude indicator for pitch control.
Right.
But then as you speed up and start climbing, it's the VSI.
Yep.
To keep that climb rate steady.
You got it.
All right.
And you're still watching all those other important instruments, too.
Right. Of course. The power gauges, the heading indicator, the turn coordinator.
All of them.
Okay, so that's instrument takeoffs.
Right.
We've talked about auto rotations with servo failures.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you can share about flying helicopters on instruments?
Well, before we wrap up,
Okay.
I want to touch on something we've been hinting at.
Okay.
The impact of technology.
Ah, technology.
Okay.
Always changing things up in aviation.
It is.
How has technology changed helicopter instrument flying in recent years?
One of the biggest changes has been glass cockpits.
Glass cockpits. I've heard that term before,
Yeah.
but I don't really know what it means.
So glass cockpits are basically cockpits that use electronic displays
Okay.
instead of those old round dials.
Okay.
It's like trading in your old car dashboard
Okay.
for a fancy touchscreen.
Yeah, that sounds a lot nicer.
It is.
So what are the benefits of glass cockpits for helicopter instrument flying?
Well, they give you a lot more awareness,
Right.
less workload,
Okay.
and they're safer.
Okay, those are some pretty good reasons. Let's talk about each one.
Okay.
Starting with that awareness. How do glass cockpits help you see what's going on around you, especially when you can't see outside?
Glass cockpits show you the information in a much better way
Okay.
than those old analog instruments.
Okay.
Like the PFD, the primary flight display.
Yeah.
It usually shows all your important flight info on one screen,
Okay.
like your airspeed, altitude, heading, attitude, vertical speed.
Wow. Okay.
So it's much easier to keep track of all that.
So instead of having all that info spread out
Yeah,
over a bunch of instruments,
Right.
it's all in one place.
right, exactly. And then the MFDs, the multifunction displays,
Right.
you can customize those
Okay.
to show all kinds of extra information, like
Yeah.
navigation data, engine stuff, weather, and even synthetic vision.
Synthetic vision. What's that?
So it's like a computer-generated view of the terrain
Right.
and obstacles,
Oh, wow.
even when you can't see anything.
It's like having X-ray vision for the outside world.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yep.
So glass cockpits give you this much richer picture
Yeah,
of what's going on around you?
they do.
Okay, and then you said they reduce pilot workload?
They do.
How do they do that?
So they take over a lot of the tasks that the pilot used to have to do manually,
Okay,
which frees up the pilot's brain
right.
to focus on other important things.
Okay.
Like a lot of glass cockpit systems can manage communication, navigation,
Right.
even some of the flying itself.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. So it's like having a co-pilot that's handling all those little things.
That's a great analogy.
So you can focus on the bigger picture.
Exactly. And this makes things safer
Okay.
because the pilot's not so overwhelmed
Right.
and they can react better to things that pop up.
Okay. That makes sense. Less work means less stress.
Right.
And you can handle those surprises. Okay, and finally, you said they're safer.
They are.
How do they directly make things safer?
So glass cockpits often have safety features
Right.
that you just don't get with the old analog instruments.
Okay.
Like a lot of them have TOTO-ABS, terrain awareness, and warning systems
Okay.
that can tell you if you're about to hit something,
Oh, wow.
like terrain or obstacles,
Weird.
even when you can't see anything.
It's like having another set of eyes looking out for you,
That's a good way to put it.
making sure you don't run into anything. And then there's TCAS, right?
Right.
Traffic collision avoidance systems.
Yeah.
That's to avoid other aircraft.
Exactly.
Okay, so it seems like glass cockpits have totally changed how we fly helicopters on instruments.
They have.
All those advantages.
Yeah.
Like better awareness, less workload, and more safety.
Right.
It really makes you wonder, what's next for this technology?
Yeah.
What's on the horizon for glass cockpits and other advancements in helicopter instrument flying?
So the future of helicopter instrument flying.
Yeah.
It's full of exciting possibilities.
Okay.
We're on the edge of some really big advancements,
Okay.
especially in automation and AI.
Automation and AI in helicopters. That sounds futuristic.
It is pretty futuristic.
So how could those be used in instrument flying?
So we're already seeing these really advanced autopilots
Yeah.
that can handle more and more of the flying,
Right.
making things easier and safer for the pilot.
Okay.
But I think we'll see even more automation in the future.
Wow.
Maybe even helicopters that can fly themselves
Whoa.
and do complex missions
Right.
in tough environments without a human pilot.
Autonomous helicopters. That would be a game changer.
It would.
What about AI?
AI could change things too.
Okay.
Imagine AI that can look at tons of flight data
Yeah.
in real time
Okay.
and give pilots predictions and advice
Oh, wow.
to make the best decisions.
So it's like having an AI co-pilot.
It is, yeah.
That can see problems before they even happen.
Exactly.
That's incredible.
AI could also help us make better training programs,
Okay.
customized to each pilot's strengths and weaknesses.
Oh, wow.
That could really improve learning and how good pilots are.
So AI could make pilots better, but also make the training better.
Exactly.
It's crazy to think about all the possibilities.
Is.
This has been an amazing deep dive
It has.
into helicopter instrument flying.
It has.
We've covered everything from those basic skills,
Right.
like cross-check, interpretation, and aircraft control,
Uh-huh.
to those complex maneuvers,
Yep.
emergencies, and how technology is changing everything.
It is.
I feel like I understand so much more about how demanding this type of flying is
Yeah, it is demanding.
and the skill and precision it takes
Right.
to master it.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and insights.
My pleasure.
I hope our listeners now have a better understanding of what it takes to fly a helicopter on instruments.
Yeah,
And for those aspiring helicopter pilots out there, remember, the sky's the limit.
it is.
Keep learning, keep practicing,
Yep.
and never stop pushing your boundaries.
Good advice.
Until next time, happy flying, everyone.